Well, hello, folks. This is Steve Ardire with Karishma, and through Karen and Nadine Neferi, we were asked to do this presentation, and it's kind of unique because you have the baby boomer teaming up with you guys, Gen Z, and we're going to share our experiences, what I do as an AI startup advisor, what Karishma is doing, both still as a student and an entrepreneur that she'll tell you about when we cut over to her slide. So I've been in it. Let me go to full screen here. Oops, here we go. Slideshow screen. Here we go. Right. Okay, a little bit about me. So that's my website. forcemultiplier.com. So I advise numerous AI startups, and they range in healthcare, enterprise AI. I'm also a co-founder in Signal Action AI, which is explainable AI for mental health. So we're really looking at it from a different approach, using conversational AI with emotion synthesis to try to tease out more of the unconscious behavior, people's biases, their beliefs, and try to put them on a path to betterment versus what's out there today. I've been a lifelong learner for decades, and it's kind of characterized as this neo-generalist of sorts, where you apply your learnings across disciplines, which really kind of allows you to connect the dots and illuminate the dots faster, better, smarter. So life, learning is fun. It's like working out, eating right, and you get into a pattern, and it's terrific. Before COVID, I was speaking at about 6 or 7 events a year. There's a place on my website that talks about presentations, events. But my favorite topic is augmented intelligence will become the future of work. And so now it's podcasts, like the link right there, and virtual events like we're doing today. So it's been tough on all demographics out there with the pandemic, and especially you guys, as emerging from high school or going into college, it kind of is there's a lot of anxiety today. So so how are you addressing, stress, anxiety, depression? It's difficult, and it will have an impact. But just like I was talking to Karishma before we started there, it's virtual classrooms. There is an adjustment. You just got to play through, and so don't despair. Be positive. And what you're doing right now with this phenomenal program that Karen was talking about, kind of like a boot camp. This is a great way to channel your energies, into positive, productive outcomes. So if you don't follow the Twitter handle, this is not perfect because he's been dead for a number of years, but he's got so much wisdom, and occasionally, since I do follow him, I don't know who manages his Twitter account, but it's really quite, extraordinary, where he talks about, you can only learn something by doing it yourself, asking questions, thinking and experiencing, just like you're doing in this program. That's a great step in the right direction, because that's how you really become, an expert, a doer. And that's the way forward. So, so this guy, Vala Ashfar, put up this post, never confuse education with intelligence. And he talks about, what is intelligence? You learn from experience, you solve problems, then you use your knowledge to adapt to new situations. And I came in topside with this notion of cognitive flexibility. It's really the key number one skill for the future of work. And you couple up with being a lifelong learner, and you're really on to the right path. Because, what this allows you to do is, is take your knowledge and apply it to changing situations, which, the only constant in life is change, right? So as an example, what I do as a consultant, there's a lot of switching, involved. So when you're overseeing 4 or 5 engagements like I am, plus engage in, not, product development, partners, customers, and so forth. There's a lot of, like I said, it's multitasking all the time. So, you have to be able to move seamlessly, from one subject or startup to another, and have things threaded. And the beauty of cognitive flexibility is that it really sharpens, your creativity and imagination. So just like you're doing right now, in your boot camp, ideation, coming up with, product, market fit, strategy, what is going to be, the tactical execution of that. So it's really the indispensable skill to navigate the 2 key challenges with change, and complexity. Okay. Now, the most brilliant that I've seen commencement speech ever was Steve Jobs' 2005 Stanford commencement address. There's the link. This is being recorded. You should really listen to it. The wisdom that he espoused on that day was phenomenal. So, and I just took out some of the key points about, don't let anything drown your inner voice, and he was in his stages of, everybody's mortal, so your time is limited, and you should really think carefully how you want to spend it, both in, work and personal career. And the last points are really interesting. A lot of, especially when you're young, you want to create your own personal identity. It's not going to happen immediately, but you also don't want to personify or waste trying to be somebody you're not. So I always like to be who I am, not a falsity. And the other one, which is a really difficult in the political climate we're living, is being trapped by dogma, other people's thinking. So his famous close that everybody alludes to is stay hungry, stay foolish. Okay. All right, so switching gears. So I've been, if you asked me a couple of years ago, would healthcare be my #1 vertical in my consulting, I would have said no, but it is now. And the intensity in terms of healthcare AI startups around the globe, it's a big number in terms of investment. It's topping all the other industries and deal activity. And finally, the FDA is starting to open up, with healthcare tools and devices for fast track approval. So your timing for what you're doing right now is propitious, and it's only accelerating, going forward. All right. So because the criteria of being smart is a little bit different, from just a few years ago to what I've been saying here in 2020. It's being able to do complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, emotional intelligence. That's huge right now. I'm a big fan of emotion AI, which is a big component in signal action AI, because people don't change behavior on information. You could see that in certain states that opened up too fast versus other ones that are more data science driven states that are opening up progressively. And I'm a liberal arts. That was my graduate, decades ago. But the 4th industrial is about empowering people. So you can just see it's the meaning making, critical reasoning are uniquely valuable along with the lifelong learning. I'm a proponent that machines will ultimately emerge as the top collaborators. I didn't say they're, if you're, they're going to take over jobs that are procedural, but if you're doing knowledge work, they will be your top collaborator. Because look at these statistics. 20 to 35% of collaborations just come from 3 to 5% of employees, which begs the question, what's the rest of the people at the organization doing, right? And the other metric is, over half of executives are struggling to keep their workplace current. So when you're getting almost 90% saying, and this is a couple of years data, but it's higher right now, wise counsel will emerge. AI and need for speed, AI and complexity, all the, the framework is there. So that's why I think augmented intelligence will definitely become, the key ingredient for the future work. So I've been using augmented intelligence for the past 3 years rather than AI, because it means machines working with humans. So it's a collaboration of sorts, and it's to become pervasive. So, so a couple other things here. The quote from Katharine Hepburn, if you don't know, I love that quote. You got to be kind of, your own rebel, but in a good way, because, you don't want to always follow the rules. Chance favors the prepared mind, Louis Pasteur, but timing is critical. And then this concept of ikigai is really something that a lot of people are locking onto. It means doing, trying to get the nexus between passion, mission, profession, and vocation. And if you can achieve that, I think you've really hit the, the right money ball there. So with that said, I'm going to stop. Were there any chat questions that came in, or I'm going to just turn it over to Karishma? Well, I know we're going to have a Q&A on the back end, but if anybody has a burning question, you can ask it now before we go over to Karishma. No?
No
okay,
questions.
You're on. Okay, you're on, Karishma.
Okay, let me see if I can share my screen here. Okay, so maybe I can start with just explaining the product idea and kind of the system that is the innovation. So this is actually an emoji-based communication board. So just like as a preface, like an innovation doesn't have to be too complex. In fact, it could be really a simple system that delivers the outcome that is necessary. So just as a background of this presentation is that patients with limited speech, they do rely on paper communication boards. And in this day and age, you'd be kind of surprised that people are using paper communication boards. So this leads to major safety implications and adverse health outcomes. And so as a whole, it's compromising the quality. So if we look at kind of the background, 37.7% of the nurse-patient communication sessions are unsuccessful. So essentially the sessions are not even working. And then 62% of the patients report a high level of frustration. So we need an alternative that combines speed, accuracy, and reliability. So this is like kind of the overview of our goals or our motivations behind creating this communication board. So if you look at an innovation, the first step is really to identify a problem or to identify something that would need improvement. So this is just a kind of a funny story. So I was thinking about this idea and I was really just playing around with my phone and I really landed on an emoji page. And so that was really the aha moment for me. And so I realized that this could be used as a punctuation, as an emphasis, or even a replacement for words. So a funny story is that in 2015, the word of the year, so the Oxford Dictionary word of the year was actually this emoji. So you can just see how it's really gaining a lot of attention. And also how it's so glanceable. So as soon as you see the emoji, you're really able to understand the whole meaning. And so one of that example can be seen when American students were able to understand Japanese soap operas just by looking at the facial expressions. So you can see that a lot of the expressions and a lot of the communication is done just with expressions and tone and things that you wouldn't even expect. So maybe someone would expect that it has a lot to do with the words or the language, but really we're crossing a lot of cross-cultural barriers. We're crossing a lot of just in a sense of barriers. So as I was mentioning before, the standard board kind of looks like this. So you can see that it is based in English and it does have specific emoticons and specific sorts of like pictures. But those, so for example, if you're in a hospital and then you would get this standard communication board and then you move to another hospital, you would get a different board. So now you have to retrain the whole system, right? So that could pose some issues. And also, what if you don't speak English, right? So this, so essentially you need a board that can communicate with the patient, with the caregiver caregiver with the physician, and essentially this is delivering the health outcome. So you're probably curious, like, so what does this emoji board even look like? So it essentially has some tabs based on the categories, and then we're able to select a certain amount, because after a certain amount of emojis, it might become too complicated, or maybe even kind of doesn't even convey the message. So we decided on a maximum of 7, and I'll discuss some of the research behind that. And we try to make it as simple as possible with just 3 buttons, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So as a whole, so I'll also talk about how research and innovation can kind of be tied together. So one of the things I did was, once I started this innovation, I also did research on the innovation just to see if the outcomes were as I expected. Because obviously there could be a product and you think it's going to work fantastically, but then you're not sure exactly, maybe like the problem areas, you don't know if it even works, or even if it's delivering the outcomes. So I did some research on this, and I realized that, so this is a comparative study, right? So we're comparing this emoji board with this standard board. And then we realized that it did address the inadequacies. So this could potentially lead to fewer medical errors. And so some of the aspects that we could improve is to use health-specific emojis. So if you look at this and we want to possibly send this to like a hospital setting, you see that one of the tabs is not health-specific emojis. So maybe something we could add is something related to like a healthcare setting. So maybe making it more customizable is like one of the options. And then even extending it beyond that is potentially having it with a touch screen, so it can go into the ICU or ventilator facilities. Or even the whole inspiration is to make it like a brain-computer interface system, so that patients who are unable to move, so patients with locked-in syndrome, patients with complete paralysis, are able to communicate. So essentially, this is allowing people who may not even be able to communicate to suddenly have a voice. And I think that's a really powerful thing. So we can see that we're starting to integrate brain-computer interface signals. We're starting to use different types of eye tracking technology. So a funny thing is that I thought that like this project could kind of be done in 1 year, and it would work perfectly, but really that didn't happen, right? So it took a lot of like redoing things, finding out new solutions, and even asking help from mentors, especially. So maybe if I can go to the website, that might be helpful as well.
Yeah. And now, while you're going to the website, it's now the commercialization of brain-computer, interfaces. The sophistication is finally the manifest regarding, it wasn't there even a few years ago, but now it's actually getting exciting, and you're dialed in to get your BCI in September, which will really start to accelerate your product development.
Are you able to see the website?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of the website that shares this story, or even like the journey of this communication board. So just to reiterate the idea, it is an electronic communication board that's composed of emojis rather than letters, and it monitors brain signals, so you're able to do emotionless communication. So patients with paralysis or patients with the locked-in syndrome, for example. And so you might be wondering, like, what is the brain-computer interface used for? It's used to visually select the emoji of your choice. So you can see like the board, and then the interface like kind of looks for the emoji. So you're able to just, so for example, if you visualize moving your left arm, that would result in like one movement to the right. So it's like tracking with the cursor.
And this is where the Karishma, this is where the sophistication of the eye tracking, to really lock on in a very, accurate, seamless way is really imperative then, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so artificial intelligence is kind of the system that allows you to track the most frequently used emojis. So kind of like how Netflix has like a suggestions list. This would also kind of understand the user and also be able to deliver like the frequently used emojis and overall increase efficiency. So you can see some of the presentations. So this really started with Pediatrics 2040. And so I submitted in the category of artificial intelligence and big data, and this was a first place winner. So you can see, I'll also post a link in the chat as well, but you can see like the overall abstract. So the origin story is really that I was an intern in 2015 at the Children's Hospital of Orange County, the Medical Intelligence and Innovation internship program. And it was a summer internship, kind of like how everyone is here as well. And I was actually the youngest intern there. So I was not really sure exactly what was going on. And so I think I learned a lot from that internship, and also like from learning from multiple mentors. And I have to say, like, different mentors had different suggestions. So I had to kind of combine those suggestions, or I had to just look for the ones that really struck out to me. So essentially there was a lot of feedback, but so that could be a good thing or a bad thing, right? So
actually, you know, because I just heard a little bit about the previous session, and you made an excellent point to reinforce for the, you know, for the viewers here, is that it's not a question of, I think one of the comments was get a lot of mentors. That's not correct. What Karishma said is exactly right. You have to really lock on to the ones that are providing real substantive value, and to offer what I call informed perspectives. A lot of startups, I will tell you this, if I look at, you know, a candidate as a startup engagement, it has too many advisors, you know, it's like anything else. It's going to become too noisy, too discordant. So you really have to go through your own triage and lock on to the ones that matter. So just wanted to reinforce your point, Karishma.
Yeah, exactly. And then different mentors have like different backgrounds. So so for this project specifically, I had a lot of mentors in entrepreneurship, also in medicine, also in healthcare, and even like within medicine, like physicians, nurses, different people within the healthcare system. So I think just getting a broad range is also really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So going from the pediatrics, so after this conference, this is kind of the Q&A. So that is, so I highly suggest attending conferences, especially because of the networking sessions that exist there. And also, so that's actually also how I met Steve. So with the conferences, you're able to get new ideas. So for one example was a nurse came up to me and suggested, you know, what if we were to use this with patients with autism? And so that was actually an avenue I had never even thought of. So I think conferences really do provide a way for you to express your ideas, but maybe even modify them. So maybe by the next conference, you have a completely different idea. And I think every sort of conference has its focus. So the Pediatrics 2040 was more focused on the future of pediatrics. So what could we expect in 40 years, right? Not 40 years, 20 years. And then there was also a conference at Stanford Medicine X. So this was a presentation I did when I was a junior in high school, and then continuing on to AI Med and MIT and also the Southern California Academy of Sciences. So, and there were also several invitations. So I think just having a great idea and then continually building upon it. So I think like starting with an idea is great, but it's really important to really follow through with all of those aspects and to continually seek feedback.
Very important. That feedback is huge, and you know that helps you stay on the right critical path. So can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah, and then so in terms of the research, so the way that I structured this project was I was also able to conduct research along with this innovation, because I was also personally really curious about whether this was a product that could actually have an impact. So I was able to start on some of the preliminary research, but once we're able to like come up with a final product, I would plan on putting it, so the research was actually with able-bodied participants. So since the end goal is actually for patients with who are paralyzed or patients with locked-in syndrome, I would eventually want to hold clinical trials and also make the research reproducible so that other people can also conduct the research as well.
So there was a chat question. I'll just, since you're presenting.
Yeah.
So the question was, how did you find these research opportunities, and where did you look for them?
Yeah, so I personally think that one thing builds on the other. So for example, when I was at the Southern California, like the JSHS, that is when I heard about the science fairs, right? And then when I was at, so if we can go back to this slide. So when I was at Pediatrics 2040, that was when I heard about Stanford Medicine X. So I think just, it's kind of hard to explain in the sense that one thing builds onto the other, and you'll be able to.
There's a linkage though, is what
exactly, yeah.
There's linkage, yeah. Yeah. And so what about team members besides your brother and the advisory board that you have for Out Loud?
Yeah, so we can go on to about us. Yeah, so I think it's really important to build a team that has a variety of interests and a variety of angles. So for example, I'm a cognitive science major at UCI, and my brother is a computer science major. And I think he's much more experienced in artificial intelligence and like the coding aspect. So we've decided to partner up to actually make this a product and a reality. So I think in the beginning it was kind of like a project rather than a product. So we were planning to just, we were just seeing if the idea was even a possibility, right? And then I think the research just kind of validated that this could actually happen. So now we're partnering with Steve, who is a startup advisor, and we have specific like people who are interested in like innovation or even medicine or neurology. So I think we really have all of the aspects in place.
And there's a linkage, like with Venus Amreti, a very impressive startup called Neural Rehab VR. So she is actually doing cognitive, playing upon the brain plasticity and using cognitive therapy combined with physical therapy, because one of her latest partners is a company called Gorbal Rehabilitation. So you can actually, combine the two, where a patient, that's disabled can be in a harness, but when they're doing, there's like 8 or 9 different games, they can actually really feel like, totally eliminate the fear of falling, and just allow them to pursue to their best ability to try to really combine, like I said, cognitive. So it's really a new form of advanced, the next step, rather than just, bifurcating into traditional physical therapy with a human or occupational therapy. You're really combining it, and she's really starting to find her way forward there. And Dr. Chang, that's where you were an intern at 14 at Children's Hospital as well. Dr. Chang is phenomenal. He actually has the AI Med Conference, and he just stood up earlier this year a consulting group called MI10. MI10 is their consulting group. They do assessments, education, clinician-led, rather than going to the big systems integrators like Accenture, PwC. And he's onto something here. In all disclosure, I'm an advisor to MI10 as well. But he's really a champion, one of the leading lights out there for the intersection of AI and healthcare. So out of this, so let's just project forward before we get into questions. I think we got like 15 or 10 minutes left. So what are your next steps then? You're like I said, you're going to be getting your BCI dev kit in September, Karishma, right?
Yeah.
and that will allow you to do what, to really get, really, not only is your younger brother doing a rewrite to Python, but then you can actually use the kit, figure out what type of AI machine intelligence is most, germane to where you want to go next with your, the development of the emoji board, and also talk about a little bit about your nonprofit. And you've been very proactive about reaching out, to targeted entities for grants as well, which might be something interesting for some of the folks on the call.
Yeah, so part of research and part of the whole project is the need for funding. So you definitely need to. So I would suggest maybe like creating a spreadsheet with specific grants. So, and I had different strategies for funding at different points of the project. So when I was a high school student, I was doing a lot of research with this project. So I was looking for research grants, specifically for high school students, specifically for science research. So now that it's becoming more of like a medical innovation, we're looking for grants that fund nonprofits, because we're planning to create a nonprofit organization, like surrounded on this product essentially. So we're looking for grants that have to do with nonprofits, that have to do with like the medical field essentially. And also knowing kind of the specifics of each grant. So one of the important parts was, so this is also where mentors could be really helpful, is we were talking to one of our mentors about specific grants, and you can see that many of them are actually founders of their own companies. So they've probably gone through this much earlier and a lot more than we have. So we were asking, like, do you know any grants, or would you have any suggestions? And one of our mentors actually specified kind of like the good and the bad essentially about the grant. So like kind of the differences between the NSF versus the NIH grant, or the differences between like specific types of grant essentially. So it's also important not just to write a really exciting and really comprehensive application, but also to know what it is you're applying to. Exactly.
So it's sort of like, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So it's good to get on the right critical path. So let's turn it over to questions. I'm sure there's a number of them out there. So Karen, is that good?
Yeah. Anybody like to raise their hands and participate in the discussion with Karishma or Steve? We have a few folks on. Douglas, Eunice. I have a question. Now, you spoke briefly about NSF and the NIH, and I don't think our students really know what that is. Can you talk a little bit more about those grants?
Yeah, so the NSF is the National Science Foundation, and the NIH is the National Institutes for Health. So the NSF has specific grants, while the NIH has specific grants. And so you can see that some of them would want like a product already in progress, and they would want results before you even start essentially. So one of them would want you to really show that you've done you've implemented this project probably in like clinical trials or in different settings before you apply for future funding. So I think the key difference is actually the stage of your project. So while one of them you would want your project to be pretty early stage is actually what they prefer, the other one you would want to be more in the later stages.
Now, can you have just an idea and apply for one of these grants, or you have to have really a prototype in hand?
One of them, which one requires the prototype in hand? I always get this confused, Karishma. Vina told us this. I forgot though.
I think that the NSF would want you to have the project ready.
Okay.
I think we have a question in the chat. Oh.
Yeah, I just answered.
You just
I
answered
had
that, yeah.
all panelists and attendees. I forgot to check the right box. So, okay. The question was, have you worked with any startups involved using AI in emergency rooms or ambulances? I'm familiar with that, and it's a great area. I have not personally, but it's really, you know, I mean, if you can actually start the triage process, you know, with machine assistance, you know, right at the point of, you know, what, especially at the ambulance with, you know, emergency technicians, that's a huge advantage, especially, you know, with response times, you know, if depending what your, you know, impairment is, it's, minutes are precious. So it's a great endeavor.
Yes, I think we have a student team working on, you know, maybe Vanessa's on the team, you know, maybe using AI to treat complex injuries, right? And how that can improve the outcomes. And that was actually talked about by, I think it was Dr. Kabir over at Chalk. So he presented that unmet clinical need. Now we have another one coming in for the eye tracking. Did you use any form of vision processing in order to accurately track eye movement, or how did you guys end up figuring out how to track eye movement?
So currently we have the two systems. So we have the emoji board, and then we're planning to pair it with either eye tracking or brain-computer interface. So we haven't been able to implement the two systems together, which I think is a really key part. And so like Steve was saying, we get the developers kit in September. So that is when we'll get specific information on how exactly it's working as a pair.
Great. We have a student, Eunice, would like to actually come on the microphone. Eunice, go ahead.
She's muted. Oh, there she is.
Yeah, sorry, I had some other tab that was blocking my mute button, but hi, Karishma and Steve. Thank you guys for being here today. I really appreciate it. To my understanding, Karishma, you came up with your idea for the emoji board in high school. So I was just wondering, like, what were your first steps from that idea? Like, what did you do to develop that idea as a high school student?
Yeah, so the first idea came up in the Medical Intelligence and Innovation internship. So that is when I submitted the idea first as an abstract to the Pediatrics 2040 conference. And that is where so once I was at the conference, I was able to really network with physicians and physicians and entrepreneurs to think about exactly how the idea would be implemented. So after that conference, I contacted the lab director at the UCI Brain Computer Interface Lab. And so once I was able to contact the director, I was able to conduct some of the more of the research that I was presenting. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, this might kind of be an obvious question, but what exactly is the Pediatrics 2040 conference? Is it something that like you have to be invited to, or?
No, so the Pediatrics 2040 conference is actually open to anyone, and you're able to submit at any stage of your project. So yeah, I would highly recommend you to apply as well.
Thank you, that was useful.
I
learned something new today.
That's terrific.
Yeah, I think the interesting part is that you can really be at any age. So when I was applying, I actually learned about the conference, and when I learned about it, I heard about this category of artificial intelligence. And at that stage, I didn't even know what that meant, right? So I think there's just been a huge learning curve and a huge amount of learning that went from knowing about the conference to actually submitting.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to be 18. You can submit while you're in high school and then go attend. And then, is there a maximum age? Maybe I'll.
I don't know.
That's great.
Now, I'd like to ask you a question. Like, you know, when you and Steve actually engaged, like, how did you approach Steve to, you know, be a mentor? You know, like, did you just ask, or did you engage in a different conversation first? I mean, how did that all come about?
So it was a confluence of sorts. My brother actually has aphasia. So it was something that was very conscious to me, and looking for solutions. Like that's where it really bubbled up. But in addition to that, with my connection, so at the AI Med conference, I've been participating for the past couple of years on Shark Tank. I was co-moderator of Shark Tank. So just like you're doing in pitches, I do a lot of this type of stuff. And even with people like Vina, so I'm ready with the neuro rehab, I did facilitate, at the Stevenson's Cancer Institute in Oklahoma, an opportunity, since, I reached out to the neurosurgeon there and the head of rehabilitation. And it really takes these type of, out of the box connections to make things happen. But I really thought that the value of what, there's 2 million Americans, just Americans alone, with aphasia. And the hardest thing is, if they had an easier way to communicate, that would be great. It would be great for the caregivers and, and them themselves. So it's a great problem to try to solve. So we just kind of, off of the AI Med last December, that's where we kind of, fostered this. And I said, yes, I'd be happy to become a mentor, and also assemble some of the other, these are pull-throughs from me that were part of the value add as well.
Great. Any last questions before we go on our little break? And then we have Hugh Bender, our lead scientist at one of our startups here, Arakari Biosciences, joining us today at 1 o'clock. Any last remarks, Karishma or Steve, as our students are embarking on this entrepreneurship journey?
I think mine were captured in my front end of the presentation, which I'm glad you recorded. It's really, like I said, stay hungry, stay foolish, get on, just like I think Karishma was a beautiful exemplification of, now she's a seasoned pro at the young age of, you're still 19, or did you turn 20 yet, Karishma? So she has 6 years experience of underneath her belt already, which I think is really admirable.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, mentorship is really important. And I think as a sense, it's also a way to be inspired. So there are going to be points in the innovation journey where you're not really sure if the product will even work, and you really can't see the finish line. But mentors are really the ones who you're able to continue to meet and you're able to continue to speak to, who will probably tell you that it's really worth pursuing, and it's really worth going the whole way through. So for example, like when I first started as an intern, I even there were like certain presentations where I even forgot to introduce my name. Like I just went on with the presentation, right? So I think just learning from instances like that, and learning that that it's okay to make mistakes, really, like it's totally fine, and you'll learn from them, and you'll be able to really grow from that.